Right, hey everyone, hope remote learning is going all right for you guys. Welcome back to environmental science. Today we're going to be going over notes 1.1. So again, if you have any issues or any questions, or if you're missing any papers, please email me and let me know and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. So you should pull out of your packet the note sheet that says notes 1.1. And there's a picture of a sheep and a cow on the front, and it's 2 pages stapled together. Okay, so you should get this one out. I'm going to be going over a PowerPoint here on my computer, and you will be able to follow along. So if I have things up here that are written that you don't have written on your notes, then you can fill that in. So you'll want a pencil or a pen so you can fill this into your notes. Okay. So this is notes 1.1, Introduction to Environmental Science. Normally we'd start off with just introduction to science in general, but there's a lot of different activities related to that. So we are, I've moved this a bit forward in our plan. So we'll be going over just a little bit introduction to different environmental terms right now. And then later when you guys return to the classroom, we'll talk about science a little more generally. Okay, so when we talk about the environment, there are probably 2 words that you're already familiar with. So normally you'd discuss with your neighbor, you're probably sitting there alone. But how would you define environment and how would you define environmentalism? Think about these things for a couple seconds, and then we'll move on to define these 2 words. How would you define environment? How would you define environmentalism? Well, if we want to define environment, and you can write this in your notes, this is basically all living and non-living things that organisms interact with. So they interact with each other in this all living and non-living things. Okay, so we have different words related to these non-living and living parts. Okay, so the first one is biotic factors. Okay, when you think bio, then just think living things. Like biology is the study of living things. So biotic factors are the biotic parts of an ecosystem. So here's a picture of a sheep that is across from BFA. Sometimes there's little little sheep and goats and stuff in front of BFA. So this was last winter, and there was this beautiful pink sunrise and all these sheep out in the snow. So I went out and I took some pictures. Right now there are some baby goats across from the school, and they are so cute. But this was when there was a sheep there. So if we think about biotic factors, what would be the biotic factors of this kind of snapshot of the Condoran ecosystem? Well, you'd have a sheep, tree, grass, maybe some of the earthworms in the soil below the sheep and below the grass. Maybe any ticks that are on the sheep. It's kind of gross, okay? And even the humans that are shepherding the sheep. Okay, so those would be living parts of the environment, and you can kind of jot some of those down. Keep in mind, I've got no borders around these slides, and so you can draw and write outside of these slides as much as you want. I know sometimes the blanks are a little bit small, so do whatever you need to take in as much space as you need. So a lot of times people think that the environment is only living things, but something that's important to realize is that it's also abiotic parts of the environment. The environment can include non-living things as well. A means no or none. Like atheist is someone who does not believe in God, while a theist believes in someone believes in God. Okay, so you get these A in front of something. So biotic is living, abiotic is non-living. So you just add an A in front of the word to make it non, okay? So what are some examples of abiotic factors in this Condoran ecosystem here? Well, the snow would be an example. It's water, it's non-living, it's frozen. The air that the sheep is breathing right now is going to be an abiotic factor. Maybe the temperature is an abiotic factor. It's really cold this morning, and so that is also something. So maybe the air pressure, precipitation, temperature, these are all factors that make the environment what it is. And so these are the things that we're going to be studying in environmental science. So what is environmental science? Environmental science is the study of how the environment affects us and how we affect the environment. So, for instance, we might be studying this Condor River running right next to BFA, both how it affects us, but also how does our school affect the creek and how does that affect the water? So we need to be able to know how to study fresh water so that we can minimize our impact, so on and so forth. This contains a lot of different studies. So for instance, chemistry, biology, political science, economics, you've got all of these different sciences and studies coming together that compose environmental science. I really kind of view environmental science as one of those capstone classes because you're taking almost everything that you've learned and you're putting it into practice now. So whether you've been in biology or in chemistry or in earth science or some other science class, you're going to have a little bit of each of those subjects at play within this class. You're also going to bring in a little bit of politics, a little bit of history, things from economic class. You're going to bring in reading in English class because of different literature on the subject. So this has a lot of different things. Ideally, environmental science is done without bias, okay? So science is something that we try to do without subjective opinions. So for instance, environmental science might say what the temperature of this creek is and what the pH of the water is, but it's not going to tell us certain opinions on whether the creek is good or whether the creek is bad. Those are different opinions that we can come up with based off of what environmental science is telling us. Okay, environmentalism, okay, that is even different than environmental science. That's more of a social movement for protecting the natural world from harmful consequences brought on by humans. Okay, so environmentalism, you could fill that in your notes. Right, so this is more with bias. There's more personal viewpoints. Typically, there's a lot of activism. So a view or a picture you might think of is of people at a protest holding up signs or maybe a certain way of life. Okay, so sometimes people are like, oh, you're an environmentalist. And then they might say that to me. Well, yeah, I'm an environmental science teacher, so I enjoy studying the environment. But there also is an element of environmentalism in my life, in the fact that I strive to take care of the environment through different actions that I take. Trying to not use single-use plastic and other things like that is going to be more of an environmentalism aspect of this whole conversation. All right, so there's 3 types of environmentalism that we're going to discuss, and these 3 types kind of help us critically think about how to make decisions when it comes to our relationship to the environment. Okay, so the first one is anthropocentric, second one is biocentric, and the third one is ecocentric. So let's go through these one at a time. Okay, here's kind of a diagram showing us anthropocentric, focused on mankind, biocentric, focused on mankind, but also more on the living animals and plants around us, and ecocentric, kind of looking at the whole system as an entirety. All right, so anthropocentric. The reason why I have anthropo here in red is because anthropo is the root word meaning mankind or human. Okay, so you'll anthropology, for instance, is the study of mankind. You get anthropomorphic, for instance, like paintings of God might be anthropomorphic, where they depict him as a man. Okay, so anthropocentric basically means it's centered on humans. So the big idea for anthropocentric environmentalism is that the earth and its resources exist for us to use. We want to help the earth. So it's not anti-earth, it's we want to help the earth, but for the purpose of helping ourselves, okay? And sometimes it might be detrimental to the earth. Sometimes we want to help ourselves regardless of whether that helps the earth. So sometimes it might be harmful. Other times we will want to help the earth, but in order to help ourselves, okay? There's two main types that a lot of people talk about when they talk about anthropocentric environmentalism. The first type is apocalyptic, and the second type is emancipatory. So let's look at these two types of environmentalism, okay? So when it comes to apocalyptic environmentalism, right, and I'm gonna put a lot of thoughts up here. You can just summarize these into a couple words or write what you feel needs to be written down. You can also pause this video at any time. Right, humans are severely damaging the world and they're harming future generations. So that's kind of the main idea of apocalyptic is we're messing everything up. The whole world is going to crash and burn. An apocalypse is happening. We're in a huge crisis. And the main reason that's a problem is because our kids are going to grow up in a world full of trash. And our kids are going to grow up in a world that is not like the world we grew up in, or our grandfather and grandfathers grew up in, grandmothers grew up in, okay, grandparents. So the primary consequences we care about here is humans are really going to suffer from this. And so what we need to do is increase the governmental power and regulations in order to keep our world a good place for future generations. So parts of this aren't necessarily bad. It's just the focus is on us as a human race. So if we look at emancipatory environmentalism, emancipatory, apocalyptic, when you think of an apocalypse, you kind of think of, well, I think of 2020, but you kind of think of the whole world's falling apart and undergoing a crisis and everything. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world. So emancipatory is kind of more of this idea of freedom, freeing, like you're free to make good choices. So for instance, in America, the Emancipation Proclamation was the proclamation that was meant to free slaves. Okay, so this is more of a freedom thing, like a positive, practical approach to help human society. And again, it's helping human society. And this is more about promoting awareness of the environment and of stewardship. And so we want to increase recycling habits and things like that. So the other one is kind of, apocalyptic environmentalism is more like everything's about to crash and burn and we're going to die and our kids are not going to have a good future. So quickly, let's increase the government. Emancipatory environmentalism is kind of like, well, let's help human society. And so let's promote awareness and education, not necessarily government regulation, but more just education, and kind of create this culture of recycling and just the freedom to do that in order to help our society run well. Okay, so those are both considered to be anthropocentric because they're both about human society and helping us thrive. Okay, biocentric. All right, so here we're looking more at, it's centered on the biology, the living things around us, animals, plants, fungi. Okay, and here the needs of non-human organisms are just as important or even more important than the needs of humans. Okay, so we don't have the right to exploit non-human organisms because they have a right just as much as we do. Okay, so animal rights is a huge part of the biocentric camp in a sense. Okay, so animals don't just exist for humans, they have rights and value independent of how humans use them. So this sheep has wool, and we might use the wool to send to China, and then they'll create some clothes, send it back to us, and we've got clothing made of wool. Okay, so that doesn't necessarily harm it. Now, maybe this sheep is going to end up at the dinner restaurant, and you're going to get a yufka with a lamb meat in it. Okay, so do we have a right to do that, or does the animal, would that be like murder? do we need to be vegetarian? So typically it's not maybe that extreme, but they will go against animals being used in entertainment or experiments or cruelty. So not breaking an elephant's back trying to make him do cool tricks at a circus. Okay, so that's more of a biocentric environmentalism. Let's focus on the trees, let's focus on the animals, and like human society, sure, but like let's focus more on the biocentric here. Ecocentric, okay, this type of environmentalism is more about the needs of non-living and living parts of an ecosystem and just how they're all equally important. Okay, so this wants to focus more on a person's impact on the entire system. So for instance, in climate change, we deal with like composition of the atmosphere and is our temperatures getting warmer? That's something that's non-living. Temperature is non-living, an abiotic factor, but it is having an impact on all the living things as well. So we do want to focus on the whole. All right, so these viewpoints, ecocentric, anthropocentric, and biocentric, aren't necessarily against each other. Sometimes they do come into conflict. Other times they work together well. These are just different focuses when we discuss different environmental issues. And when we discuss different things in this class, you'll want to think about, okay, is this focusing on like animals or is this focusing on our needs? Okay, so just think about a moment here. What's the difference between environmental science and environmentalism? Hopefully you should have said environmental science is more of an unbiased study or approach of the environment, and environmentalism is more of a biased personal viewpoint, lifestyle, or activism that you use to encourage a culture of stewarding the environment or taking care of the environment. All right, let's look at this. Which picture do you think best represents the environment? That's a little bit of review of what we've talked about so far. Here's our first picture. We've got a sunset at a beach. When I lived in Tampa, Florida, I took that picture. Here we've got freshmen visiting some old buildings in World War I, trenches and ruins at the French trenches for the freshman trip. And here we just have a picture of trees in the Condoran Forest. So which one do you think best represents the environment? Well, I probably would choose the middle picture. Why? Well, the first picture here, we see a lot of abiotic factors. We see clouds, which is just water in a sense, air, more water, and sand, and the sun. These things are not living, and so this is a lot of abiotic factors. We look over here, we see a lot of biotic factors. We see just a bunch of trees. We don't see the soil. We don't really see clouds in this picture, so it's mostly just trees. Here, we see both the abiotic and the biotic. We see rocks, old buildings, we see people, we see their clothing, we see trees, okay? So we see both biotic and abiotic. So all of these things are affecting each other. And so because the middle one has non-living and living, I'd probably consider that to be a better picture of the environment. Okay, there's just a little bit of review about the terms that we've learned so far. Let's start applying our ecocentric, biocentric, and anthropocentric. Okay, so as we think about the Black Forest that we're living in, think about these two different attitudes. Okay, one person might say, hey, managers of the Black Forest, we ought to use the resources for our maximum profit, recreation, and wood resource. Hey, we've got a lot of trees. Let's use that for firewood. Let's use these to build parks. Okay, let's try to use these resources so that we can get as much money as we can. Second person might say, oh, the Black Forest should prioritize biodiversity, meaning we have a lot of species, and let's prioritize a healthy ecosystem. Regardless of if we benefit from it, we need to have a healthy ecosystem. How would you classify these two different attitudes? What would attitude A be? Anthropocentric, biocentric, or ecocentric? Well, hopefully you said anthropocentric. That's more focusing on mankind. Attitude B, Black Forest should prioritize biodiversity. You probably should have said biocentric or ecocentric. All right, these have several different advantages or disadvantages. So for instance, attitude A, if you say, hey, let's use a lot of resources for maximum profit, recreational wood resource, okay, you're not necessarily addressing the fact that you need to keep that resource for the future, okay? And the value for our forest comes in how it can be used. So our Black Forest is a good thing because we can use the wood to make stuff, okay? Those could be some disadvantages because it might miss the whole picture. The advantage is it helps us focus on how we can use it currently in our current situation. Now, similarly, if we just focus on the biocentric aspect of the Black Forest, there are some disadvantages to that too. It doesn't necessarily allow us to use the resources or to think about, it doesn't help us think about how we can use the resources. And we need to, otherwise we're not going to survive. It does not always value or help us improve the forest. So maybe that helps us keep the forest the way it is, but what if we can make the forest a bit better? The advantage is that this attitude of biocentric may help the forest last a bit longer, and that means future generations can enjoy it, which then that would go back to anthropocentric. So this all comes with a balancing act, okay? So here I have kind of I took this picture the other day because I thought it was kind of cool, a big pile of logs that we had cut down in the Cundred Forest right behind the school. And it was right below some trees that were still standing, okay? So a biocentric person might say, don't touch the forest at all, just keep it the way it is, okay? But the disadvantages to that is, well, we're not really talking about how we can use the wood from the forest. We need some of that wood, okay, to build furniture, for firewood, to build railroads, okay? Anthropocentric might be like, hey, let's take all the trees, okay? We need this now, we've got to use all the wood, okay? But that might not help us benefit from the forest later. So maybe it's not truly anthropocentric because we're not really centered on our grandkids who also need that wood. If we chop down all the trees, there's going to be no forest to continue. So we need to have a balancing act, okay? Take some, leave some. This is what we call sustainability. So the word sustainable comes between these two aspects. It's more of a balance. Yes, you can take some and benefit from it, but also make sure that you're leaving some for later, okay? So sustainability is basically the ability to meet our current demand, what we need now, without ruining future resources. So without just, if you chop down all the trees, you're not going to have any more trees in the future. That would be bad. That would not be sustainable, okay? But we also want to meet current demand. So we do have to chop down some trees, okay? The German word for this is Nachhaltigkeit. Basically, nach meaning after, haltig, you're kind of getting this idea of holding something, okay? So basically it means you can take some, but even after you take some, you're still holding some in for storage, okay? You've taken some, but I'm still holding some of the forest, still holding some of the trees, okay? So forests can always be renewable if we use them at a good rate, but we got to be careful not to use it too much or too fast. And that means that we have to study things like how quickly do trees grow? How many trees can we grow? What types of trees should we grow? What types of trees offer the best wood? So there's different practices that relate to this. For instance, we can harvest timber, but what a lot of the foresters do around here in Condor is they leave a lot of dead wood behind and they leave a lot of branches behind. That's going to fertilize the soil. So again, take some of the trees, leave some of the wood behind, fertilize the soil, and help future trees. All right, we've got some terms about resources. This will be on your last page. So we're going to talk about these. If you want to take a pause and pause this video in a 1 minute break, it's fine. But we're going to continue on with these terms here that are going to be helpful for us as we continue learning about the environment. All right, we're going to do some activities this week where you're going to talk about something, different types of resources, and even throughout the year, okay? So renewable natural resource. What does it mean when we talk about something that's renewable? Well, renewable basically means that we can renew it or replenish our resource in a short time for us to use again, okay? So what are some examples of different natural resources that will be renewed? Well, for instance, sunlight and solar power, we're never going to run out of the sun. So we can use that over and over and over again. Wind, we're never going to not have wind. It's not like, oh, the world used too much wind today. No, we're still going to have wind. You're not draining the solar system of sunlight by using solar power. Okay, different things like wood, fruit, grain, those are all resources that we can use again because yes, we might eat fruit, but if you plant those seeds, you're going to make more trees, and then those trees are going to give you more fruit for later. So you renew it. A lot of more natural resources. A non-renewable natural resource is something that is not going to be replenished or renewed in time for us to use. Examples like this are coal, oil, fossil fuels, things we dig up out of the ground. Yeah, we're going to be digging up oil and drilling and mining for coal in the earth. And we need that to power different things like electricity and get gasoline for our cars. But the earth is not making oil on a continual basis. We have a certain amount of oil. Eventually, we'll probably run out. We're not going to run out of sun. We will run out of things in the ground that we're mining. There's not enough metal for everyone, that kind of thing. Okay, so here's just kind of a cool diagram showing different things that are not necessarily renewable. Okay, so solar energy using different natural resources that are always going to be there and that can be replenished is different from non-renewable things. All right, so there's some other terms that we also need to know because you're going to be examining these both in your personal life and a particular country that you'll be studying. An ecological footprint is a big term that we use in environmental science. Basically, if you can imagine walking along the sand at a beach and you make an impact with your foot, you leave behind a footprint. And that shows that you were there, you took up that space, and you made an impact. Well, an ecological footprint is basically what we take of ecological resources, different things in the environment. Okay, it's our impact on the environment, just like your foot impacts the sand. And it's the amount of land that we need in order to sustain our life. It's basically what we take. So you can kind of imagine all this wood here, that's our footprint, that's our impact on the ecosystem. And we need a certain amount of trees to help us keep up what we're taking. Biocapacity, okay, capacity, capable, what the environment is capable of giving. That's basically what the environment has for us. So the amount of trees that we have in Condon might be our biocapacity. If we take more trees than can grow back in the next 100 years, then our ecological footprint is bigger than our biocapacity. But if we take less trees than what is going to grow, our forest is going to continue getting bigger. So more biocapacity, the forest is going to keep growing. More footprint, over time, that forest is going to shrink. Now, we measure our ecological footprint and our biocapacity in a unit. Just like you would measure length with centimeters, you would measure volume with milliliters, or you'd measure how heavy something is with grams. We measure our impact on the environment using something called a hectare. Okay, a hectare is 10,000 square meters, so it's basically 100 meters by 100 meters. So if you were to take 100 meters this way, 100 meters this way, that whole box is a hectare. Okay? And a global hectare is a hectare of productive land. So basically, we use that for measuring how much is available to us and how much we take when it comes to the environment. So a hectare of, productive, maybe it's growing grass, okay? So that would be land that is producing something for us. To help you visualize it, this is approximately a hectare. So here's an overhead shot of BFA. So you can get the main building, you could get the Jan's building stuck in there. You could get all of BFA within 1 hectare. Okay, so this is about as big as a hectare, and that's the unit of measurement we use to measure. Okay, how much are we taking? How much are we? Somebody might say, oh, you have an impact of 8 global hectares, so that means it takes that much space to supply the needs that you have. Okay, so here's just kind of a 2D image from Google Earth, which does not have 3D buildings for contours. So it looks a little squished. It's okay. So that is a hectare. All right. A global hectare is going to be that amount of space, but filled with something productive, like productive forest or productive grassland, or maybe an area of the ocean where there's a lot of seafood. Okay, that would be a global hectare. So as we continue on in this class, for this unit, we're going to be using the terms global hectare, ecological footprint, and biocapacity to help us measure our impact on the environment. And so that'll be a little bit of environmental science. Then we're going to dive a little bit into environmentalism and discuss how we can make the right choices based off of what we know. Okay. So that is your notes 1.1. So hopefully you filled this all out. You can stick this back into your packet, and when you return to the actual classroom, which I look forward to for that glorious day when you actually can be here, then you will be able to turn in the papers that you need to turn in. And if you already have a binder, you can put this inside of your binder. Otherwise, I expect some of you probably don't have school supplies. So when you get here, we'll figure out what your binder will look like and how you'll organize your materials in a way that you can access things well. Okay. So if you have any questions, go ahead and email me and let me know. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to using these different terms that we've learned about to help us think about the environment in the next couple weeks.